The classic American dream story has many variations, but at the core is a dreamer armed with meager assets, a great willingness for hard work, and the perseverance to see the dream through to its end. Sometimes the dreams are on a small scale, and other times they take on dimensions worthy to be called an empire.
Randolph County, North Carolina in 1877 saw hard life on a farm. More than a decade after the Civil War, millionaires were growing at a record rate, with names like Rockefeller, Firestone, and Ford. A young boy named Gene, working barefoot on one of those farms, knew he was going to join them.
The Civil War really opened up the world in terms of possibilities. The Southern culture, which was an agricultural-based community, was faced with the confrontation of the industrial capacity in the North.
Gene's parents, William Staley and Mary Jane Ledbetter, married on October 28, 1865, just after the Civil War. They lived in a log cabin on the Ledbetter family farm deep in the North Carolina Piedmont region. Gene was born Augustus Eugene at their log cabin on February 25, 1867. He was an easygoing baby who loved being around people. Gene was adored by his grandmother, Eunice Ledbetter. The tulips of the Piedmont poplars provided a perfect place for Eunice to keep bees. When she passed in 1875, they were among many items listed in her estate, along with her Bible. Eunice was loving and religious. She believed in integrity and in people. They were impeccable values she handed down to Gene.
We know that he had an innate ability to interact with people. I think we can safely say that that came from the upbringing that he received in his home with the rest of his family. He was good at listening to people. He was good at anticipating what their needs were.
William and Mary Jane purchased the farm from the Ledbetter family in 1879. Farm life was hard. Taking care of people came naturally to the Staleys. Relatives who needed help would move in for a short time to get back on their feet. Gene was expected to work on the farm later, alongside his younger brother Arthur. As Gene got older, he began to spend less time in school and more time in the field. Mary Jane saw to his education at home using the Webster's Blueback Speller. It was the only textbook this imaginative boy would ever use.
I was lucky to get 2 months of schooling a year. The rest of the time I was shucking corn, picking cotton, or shucking tobacco worms.
Eventually, sisters Georgiana and Wilhelmina came along, but it was Gene who had an unbridled spirit to follow his own dreams.
Didn't learn fractions, never learned grammar, was just a born salesman. Had to be a born salesman, and he hated farming. He had a big name, Augustus Eugene Staley, and he thought big. It's no secret why he wanted to leave the farm.
Somewhere he had understood that there's more out there than just this farm. And even that farm in that day and time was probably considered a pretty large farm. The difficulties, again, planting crops, you got to plant crops by faith. You plant a crop, you hope. And even those that might not be spiritual, they still pray for rain.
One of Gene's favorite retreats from school and the farm was church camp, held every summer at Shiloh Methodist Church in Liberty.
Shiloh has been around since 1790, making it one of the oldest Methodist churches in North Carolina.
Church camp was a long-standing tradition by the time A.E. Staley attended. This was an exciting outing for the whole family, which included taking food to last at least a week.
And the hours of that would be structured when the farmers were in from the fields, and those that worked in local factories would be available to come and worship. There was a lot of singing, the familiar tunes that everybody would know without having to have a book in their hand.
Probably when you think about Shiloh Church, which is from our driveway from the farm to Shiloh Church, would have been about a mile and a half at the most. And so that was a place that the community went to church.
In 1880, William Staley introduced his son to a missionary who had traveled in China. This began a trajectory of unbridled success.
They would typically come from the field, wherever they might be stationed around the globe, and they would visit various churches during those summer months where they could speak to as many congregations as possible to raise funds to send them back into the field for another year.
The missionary gave my father a handful of the beans. My father turned them over to me to play with. I planted 2 rows of the beans in the family vegetable garden. I was proud of them. I weeded them and I picked them and I planted some more. The missionary said they'd be good for the soil. I believed it, even if no one else did.
For this boy, they might as well have been called magic beans. America would know them as soybeans. Gene later recalled this experience, saying there are still some soybeans in North Carolina growing from those original seeds.
North Carolina is a leader in agricultural, and A.E. Staley gets his roots and his agricultural mores and folkways, as we say down here. We can thank Staley for having the mind, you can say that genius of planting that row of soybeans, and so that when you travel back to Randolph County, if you go to Randleman, you'll likely see rows and rows of soybeans that can be directly attributed back to Staley for having encouraged production of more soybeans 100 years ago.
Soybeans today are still growing from those original soybeans that came to North Carolina in a little community down there, and look where it's at today. It's a major crop in America.
William Staley had high hopes that his oldest son would become a minister or at least continue on the family farm. He could see Gene had dreams of his own. When Gene was 14, his father told him he could load a wagon with produce from the farm and try his hand at selling in the village of Randleman, 9 miles away. Gene jumped at the chance to sell goods and be with people. Going to town, he had a wagon heaped with vegetables. Coming back, the wagon was empty. His pockets were full of money.
He would indicate to people that it was his dream to be a businessman. So traveling salesman was his first chance to test that theory about whether he wanted to be a businessman.
In 1883, Gene convinced William and Mary Jane to allow him to work in retail in nearby Greensboro. Odell's hardware store was thriving as one of the leaders of retail hardware. But Gene wasn't on their sales floor. He was working in the back, loading and unloading merchandise. He was eager to move his way up to the front of the store where he could be with customers. But this would be his first stumbling block on the way to success. On Christmas Eve, his boss told Gene he'd never amount to anything in sales and he should find a job doing manual labor. Augustus Eugene Staley was fired.
I could imagine having enough, we would call it, from my area, grit, that it would have driven him to prove Mr. Odell wrong.
Well, you can fire me, but you can't take away my ambition. If I live long enough, I'll be the head of a business as big as this.
Gene made this vow to the owner of Odell's, but it still meant he was back to work on the farm. Fate brought him back home for a reason. Less than 2 years later, his beloved father, William, died of a heart attack. William was 45. Gene was 18. The family was grief-stricken. For Gene, as firstborn, it meant taking on the burden of caring for the family. He carried out his obligation, but he wasn't going to do it as a farmer.
Yes, he did go on to great things, but he never forgot who was still here.
His brother Arthur would continue to run the farm.
He was obviously a man of his word, and he went out and he made money, and he sent money home to make sure that they had what they needed here.
Gene's first product was tobacco. He knew enough about growing it, but it proved an issue to deal with as a businessman. The problem wasn't selling too little, it was selling too much.
He was earning what for that time frame, doing that kind of a job, was an exceptional amount of money.
His customers were mostly small-town merchants in areas that were difficult to reach. Railroad travel was growing, but sometimes Gene would take a stagecoach, a horse, or even walk his way to the next town. He would sleep wherever he could.
Randleman was their nearest town of any size, all-day trip by wagon, so it was pretty tough.
Had to be a man that was driven, had to be a man that had tremendous capacity for achieving his dreams and his goals, and not easily swayed or giving up.
They were called drummers because they would drum up business for whatever wares or products they were selling. So they were well known in a lot of the small towns all over the country that they would travel town to town. But with him selling the ag products, that he covered a lot of territory in the Midwest.
In 1891, Gene branched out and began selling flavor extracts and baking powder for Southern Manufacturing Company of Richmond, Virginia. He then worked with Price Baking Powder Company out of New York. By 1895, Gene Staley was working for the Royal Baking Powder Company as manager of their western branch in Chicago.
The local boy made good, farm boy, could have stayed on the farm like 99% of the people did and been satisfied with that, but he wasn't satisfied. I imagine it took a lot of nerve to hop on the train and go north. Farm boy with third grade education. So
Gene spent 18 years on the road. He traveled to the far northwest on the Northern Pacific Railway. Some places he visited were not yet states. He was among the first passengers to travel by rail to the territories of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming.
But he definitely would have been a pioneer as far as going that far west, selling. And by the 1860s and 70s and 80s, the predominant business infrastructure and manufacturing was in the East and the Midwest. So in the 1880s and 1890s, that's where A.E. Staley would have been a pioneer. Businesses were developing as infrastructure and resources were being put in place, especially in the northwestern part of the United States.
For 6 months in 1896, he kept a written record of every stop and every order while on the road. He also kept a bit of good fortune with him, pressed four-leaf clovers inside his sales book. A.E. Staley had this bit of luck with him when he made his first visit to an Illinois town he hardly knew called Decatur. He stayed at the St. Nicholas Hotel. During his free time, he walked the town and daydreamed.
Sometimes he would have some available time and he would stroll the communities that he was visiting. He saw this home and he looked up at it. If you remember him coming from humble beginnings, log cabin or small family farm, looking at it up at a home like this one, which at that time and even today is one of Decatur's most impressive homes.
Bigger things at that time were not in Decatur. He would find the key to his next step in Chicago. A fellow salesman invited him to a concert at the Chicago Conservatory of Music. The featured pianist was Emma Louise Tressler.
It was a love at first sight story. He didn't have much to go on other than what he was able to observe in her performance, at the theater. And at that moment of first love, he didn't know who she was, where she came from. He only could see her through the music that she was playing and performing and get a sense of the emotions and the commitment to her art. And so he did. He ran across the street. He buys these roses and have them delivered to her backstage. And then he's able to invite her to dinner, which will then lead into a courtship there in Chicago.
From there, the relationship flourished. Even though A.E. Staley was traveling for work, he always made time for Emma. When she told Gene that she would be returning to her home in Bryan, Ohio, he arranged his business to take him to that area so he could focus on the local retail stores and focus on Emma. Gene and Emma were married at her family home on December 14, 1898. Emma's father, Andrew Tressler, had passed away 6 years earlier. Mr. Tressler had been the city postmaster and president of the largest bank in Bryan. Emma's uncle officiated the ceremony and her brother gave her away. The society pages listed Emma as a charming and cultured young lady whose purity and sweetness of character has won her the highest esteem. Emma shunned publicity and found her joy in playing piano and writing poetry. She gently referred to A.E. Staley as her Gene. A.E. Staley later confessed her opinions were vital to his decisions.
Now, by this time, he's aware that she comes from a good background. Her father's a banker. She is someone in the Ohio society. And so he's sitting there thinking, okay, I'm making really good money at what I'm doing. What could I do that would allow me to stay home, but make that kind of money so that I can give the love of my life the kind of life that she deserves? And so he decides that if he's going to get off of the traveling salesman route, he's going to have to establish himself somewhere where he has an abundance of customers at the ready.
Mr. and Mrs. Staley decided on Baltimore, Maryland. Mr. Staley would use $1,500 to start his own business there.
East Coast at that time is the most densely populated area of the United States, which means that Staley will be able to have an abundance of possible customers within a day's travel. Second of all, Baltimore had a conservatory, and he knew that that would contribute greatly to Emma's happiness. To have a conservatory nearby where she could continue her studies of the piano, continue doing what she loved.
Gene never questioned how he could compete in a city like Baltimore. His sixth sense gave him the answer. He knew it would be in starch. He purchased the trademark cream cornstarch and rented a loft room for $200 a year. His first employee was William S. Pritchard. Billy took care of packaging for $3.50 a week. For Gene Staley, this was an enormous step for a boy who used to work barefoot on his family farm.
My financial burden increased because I hadn't saved up the money for Billy's wages. Fortunately, I had a gold watch. Saturday was payday, and when I was short of cash, as often happened, I'd take the watch to a pawnbroker and get enough money to pay any help. By the following Monday or Tuesday, some money would usually come in from my customers and I'd redeem the watch. Billy Pritchard could see what a hard time I was having, and though he was loyal to the core, he became pretty nervous.
A.E. Staley designed his packaging to look different than what housewives were seeing. Starch was a product on shelves 12 months a year. It always sold well, but he thought it looked dull and boring.
Staley decided he was going to add his flair to it and give it a look that was going to make it attractive to customers wandering into these small stores, and it was going to be an attention catcher. If you look at those early cream cornstarch packaging, there's a lot of flourish on it, and it's colorful. And in that way, he pioneered the marketing for starch.
There was a steady climb in sales of Staley's cream cornstarch. By the sixth year, his sales were $49,000, over $1 million today. A.E. Staley's fortunes were rising. Gene and Emma lived in a rented house on St. Paul Street in Baltimore with their 5 children, Ione, Ruth, A.E. Jr., known as Gus, Arthur Rollin, or Rawl, and Mary. Emma would become a published poet, including a great tribute to her Jean. Emma rarely talked about her feelings, even to family. Instead, she put them into verse.
I have no words to tell the rose how much it means to me.
A song called My Boy used lyrics written by Emma Staley from a poem she dedicated to the love of her life. With Emma by his side, A.E. Staley had the support he needed to continue the steep climb up the industrial ladder. He would need that support for what was to come. The Great Baltimore Fire of 1904 began on Sunday morning, February 7th. Historically considered the third worst fire in an American city, it burned for 2 days, consumed 80 city blocks, and reduced more than 1,500 buildings to rubble, including the loft A.E. Staley rented for his cornstarch business. Everything A.E. Staley had worked for was gone.
That fire in Baltimore, it ravaged the city, but in particular, it really did damage to the warehouse district, which is where Staley had his warehouse for his business. There was so much damage and so many businesses involved that even those that might have had insurance weren't going to be able to make the claims because it was just so devastating. And so many people like Staley were really stuck trying to figure out how to pull things together and get back on their feet.
For A.E. Staley, the only thing that saved him was his reputation. His honesty and integrity were bankable.
There was a shrewd old Quaker banker who'd taken an interest in me and who commented, "We can't afford a growing business like yours to be ruined by an accident not likely to occur more than once in a lifetime. Order whatever materials you need. We'll let you have whatever money you want."
After the fire, Staley not only turned a profit, he introduced a new product called Staley's Cameo Laundry Starch. It was so popular, he had to hire more salesmen. By 1905, Staley was a serious competitor in the starch industry. Suppliers were refusing to sell to him. He was being shut out. But A.E. Staley's sixth sense never failed. He knew he couldn't back down. Instead, he needed to take it one step further. He needed to become a manufacturer.
His success will be so great that he will become a thorn in the sides of other businesses. Manufacturers who have larger clients are now being asked by those larger clients not to sell to Staley. So he's going to have to get creative again.
To Gene Staley, the solution was clear: stockholders. But he knew nothing about selling stock.
I didn't know the first thing about financing a business. But I had a good long experience calling on the grocery trade with merchandise. So I thought maybe I could learn how to sell stock, at least to grocers.
Like everything A.E. Staley did, he succeeded. He sold more than $300,000 worth of stock to 2,600 grocers.
Take into account that these people that he's approaching are not the typical people that would buy stock in a company. So that is a huge statement in terms of the kind of salesman Staley was and the kind of person he was. He was able to instill in them that quality of, believe in me, you won't regret it, it's going to be worth your while, you'll see. And they believed him because he was an honest and ethical businessman.
Everyone who I spoke with who knew him said he just had the ability to sell, and he was just such a genuine person. You just trusted him immediately.
The A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company of Baltimore, Maryland was incorporated on November 12, 1906. A.E. Staley was president, Billy Pritchard was superintendent, Charles Schuster was secretary-treasurer. They had two jobs: sell starch and sell stock. A.E. Staley trained the salesman himself. Mr. Staley asked each one to submit in writing exactly what they would say in their presentation to retailers.
No one can sell effectively with a canned sales talk prepared by someone else. So write your own and use your own.
Mr. Staley gave salesmen copies of letters containing character endorsements written by bankers, brokers, and vendors, and by Staley himself. He was determined to maintain a high standard of ethics. Despite the pressure he was under, Staley kept moving forward. Competitors continued nipping at his heels. AE had to buy his product elsewhere. His move to outwit big business was to go international. With fairly low shipping fees, buying starch from the United Kingdom was a good short-term solution, until he could find a manufacturing plant of his own.
It wasn't always easy. And, there was the fire and obviously the wholesalers who, all of a sudden were going to try to pinch him. But I think at that point he goes, I have something here. I really think that success fueled the rest of his career.
A.E. Staley was just getting warmed up. In 1907, Staley hired a team of experts to find a factory. Advisors suggested he look into an idle starch plant in a town Mr. Staley had frequented on his sales route with a bit of luck in his pocket. Pratt Cereal Company in Decatur, Illinois, had fallen on hard times and sold the property to the Wellington Starch Company in 1906. Wellington had problems from the start, and Standard Oil Company made a move to purchase it at a discount. AE found out about the deal, traveled to Decatur from Baltimore, and offered the bank a few $1,000s more than Standard Oil. For $45,000, he owned a plant. Mr. Staley would invest another $150,000 to get it running. The plant had run-down equipment that needed repairs, but it also had 5 railroads in the middle of fertile farmland.
That's what brought him here, was the fact that you already have an established town with an excellent railroad source. So you can get your supplies in here with no problem. And you have businesses that have already started here. You already have grain mills, silos that you can work with. And you don't really have to rebuild your infrastructure.
He could have located anywhere. It's certainly in the Midwest with the production, what he was looking to do. And then as he evolved, he was able to use the resources here to change the direction of the company and still make it profitable for the community. So I think he had tremendous vision in everything he did.
Staley received the title to the plant in 1909. Initially, his reception in Decatur was chilly. Companies had tried and failed to maintain a business in the old plant. People didn't believe an outsider could come in and make it work.
There had to be investors at that time going, oh boy, I've lost my money. I imagine the town had probably just figured it was never going to open, but he never gave up. He never let it die.
The whole idea with stay straight, move forward, don't step outside of the box. And here was a guy comes to Central Illinois, and you're not going to have a more restrictive group of people in their viewpoints. And yet he comes in and says, I got this idea, and they all made it happen.
I think that's really a testament to his belief in his visions.
A.E. Staley changed the course of history for Decatur. He changed what this community was and would become and evolve into, because we were a railroad town, and that's one of the reasons he decided to bring his plant here and his business here. It's because of the transportation network.
Today, Decatur has one of the largest flat track shipping yards in North America. AE had a promising start in Decatur, but needed the continued support of business associates in other cities. It meant he was on the rails, traveling the same routes he frequented as a salesman. One stop was Butler, Pennsylvania. This ad for stock in the Butler paper shows AE's investment of $1,500 in 1898 had grown to $165,000 by 1911. Throughout the years, he acquired so many investors in Butler, an organization was formed. The Staley stockholders of Butler elected 2 representatives to attend the company's annual stockholder meeting in Decatur. On one trip to the area in 1910, Staley was a passenger on the West Penn Railroad when the train was involved in a head-on collision with another train. 11 people were injured, including A.E. Staley. He had serious bruising and felt ill, but he was able to continue his trip to Chicago on another train. Upon his return home to Baltimore, Mr. Staley informed Decatur city officials the plant would officially open in 1912. He also said that at full capacity, 1,000 people would be employed, with a weekly payroll of $25,000. People began to believe. On March 12, 1912, at 7 a.m., the plant began its first day in operation. Augustus Eugene Staley was a bona fide manufacturer. Although there was jubilation and celebration, it was short-lived. Old equipment kept breaking down, and the plant couldn't sustain the amount of output needed to make ends meet. A.E. knew he needed someone to help him run the plant in Decatur. George Edwin Chamberlain was hired as general superintendent. G.E. was an engineer with a knack for problem solving.
A.E. had a vision, and then he knew he couldn't get there by himself, and he knew he had to get really smart, intelligent people around him to be able to elevate himself to get where he wanted to go.
While working for the Staley Company, G.E. Chamberlain designed and built the first soybean processor and the first modern grain dryer. Chamberlain's work would prove vital to the company.
G.E. invented the grain bin as far as the process of drying, which was huge because it saved a lot of time. Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of obstacles that they came across that he took care of.
Chamberlain had a big job ahead of him to get this company running, and he needed more time and more money. A.E. Staley found support in Baltimore from Charles Schuster. Desperate letters were sent back and forth between the founder and Schuster.
We are now in a very serious condition regarding starch, as our supply has all been used up and there is none in Baltimore.
We are now having a very hard time to get corn at any price. The plant has been shut down for 2 days on account of the lack of corn. I have ample corn purchased, but it seems that the farmers are so busy plowing and planting corn that they will not haul the corn to the elevators.
I also feel that business generally is not going to be as good for the next year as it has been.
The Decatur National Bank called us good and hard yesterday for overdrawing on our account. I had to go to the bank this morning to straighten the matter out. I was not treated as politely or courteously as even such a situation demanded.
Please accept the suggestion from me to more than ever watch the expenditures and the purchases. Otherwise, the end is here.
In 1914, at the start of World War I, the Decatur plant was forced to shut down.
He did whatever he could to make sure that this company survived and thrived. He had to be scared at times, scared of losing everything, losing the business, not being able to pay his workers. But he was strong enough in his own beliefs that he could make this work, that he was bound and determined to work harder, and he did.
But he always had Emma. At one point, Gene and Emma discussed the possibility that he take an executive position he was offered. Emma supported her Gene and encouraged him to keep up the fight and keep his company running.
Emma is his confidant, and she is the person that gives him the most faith in himself.
The real estate man of whom I wrote you called at my house last night and said he had a party who would pay from $40,000 to $45,000 for my home. We're now living very economically. Mrs. Staley has cut meat from our diet, and we're living on macaroni as a substitution.
I offer a suggestion to you that your future plans be discussed in the privacy of your own room, at your own home, or with Mrs. Staley or someone else who is alone interested in you, as there is a strong possibility of whatever you say now being carried, added to, and eventually may put you in bad.
I think the last hope we have is in the appeal to the stockholders, and I am going to make the best effort I possibly can to bring about the salvation of this company and its stockholders. If I fail in this last effort, then I have done all I can possibly do, and I will be able to leave the company with clean hands, clean linen, and a clear conscience.
As he worked to put the plant back in order, Staley kept photographs of the various stages of reconstruction going back to 1910. He kept a bundle of these pictures in his desk. They were a reminder of his beginning and a testament to his hard work. When traveling to sell Staley's stock, he took pictures with him to show investors. Mr. Staley believed in his method so much that he had booklets of photos made for each salesman. Then Gene did the unthinkable. He went back to his grocer friends who supported him and sold $400,000 in bonds to refinance his wounded company. In December of 1915, there was still an acute shortage of working capital, but Staley had confidence that the stockholders would support him and would subscribe to the bond issue he had asked to approve. He also issued preferred stock from his personal holdings. No one could question his devotion to ultimate success. It paid off. The plant began to thrive.
We are making money quite rapidly at Decatur, and will be in a position to take care of the necessary improvements to the plant and also provide additional working capital.
When Gene and Emma Staley arrived in Decatur in 1912 with their 5 children, they rented a home on Prairie Avenue. Then, in 1913, one of A.E.'s dreams came true.
Where we come from, we would call this a mansion on College Avenue.
One of his goals was to buy that house and live there. And it seemed whatever he set his mind to, it was accomplished.
Not only was he able to purchase one of their grandest homes, but he was here to set down roots and to stay. And he was going to make a success of whatever he started here. And it was a significant message to the community. This home signified roots and commitment.
The family moved into 361 College Avenue. Today, it's a well-preserved piece of Decatur's history, but before the Staleys, it had a history of its own.
The land that the Staley home sits on did have history in Decatur even prior to the home being built and prior to Staley's ownership of it. This piece of land was called the Mound, and it was bought by William Hanks Jr. in 1829. The Hanks family actually owned a lot of property here in Decatur at that time.
Hanks could never have dreamed that another boy in his own family, who grew up barefoot and poor, would listen to his own sixth sense and become President of the United States.
My people came here in the 1820s and were first cousins to Abraham's mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln.
The home of his dreams, sitting on land once owned by Abraham Lincoln's family, was built in 1883 and was sold to William Quinlan of the Chambers Baring Quinlan Company at a cost of $28,000. The fine new residence of Mr. W.J. Quinlan, which occupies the south hall of the square, so familiarly known to all residents of Decatur as the Mound, is about completed, and it is of a style new to our city. A brief description of it will be of interest to our readers. In 1891, the mansion was sold to W.H. Ennis, whose widow later sold it to A.E. Staley in 1913 for $20,000. Like everything he did, Mr. Staley had big ideas for the mansion, and Decatur couldn't wait to see what this newcomer had in mind now. When he decided to remodel, the Decatur newspapers published the plans. Staley added a porte cochere on the north side. He changed the look from an original Victorian exterior to an English Tudor style with an oriental roof. Perhaps a tip to his interest in the magic beans from China, the soybean, something that defined his success in years to come.
A.E. Staley and Abraham Lincoln both share a similar narrative in that they're both people who they don't always succeed at what they're doing, but they learn from those experiences.
Oftentimes, on a spring or summer evening, Mr. Staley would stroll from his home on College Hill down to the old St. Nicholas Hotel on Lincoln Square. After dinner, traveling salesmen in Decatur for the night would sit on the sidewalk in front of the hotel in comfortable cane-back chairs provided for them. he would tell about his company and his plans for the future. By making people feel important, he gained their confidence and their ideas.
You know, Ed, by talking to people and asking their advice, I most often learn what not to do. But occasionally, I get a great idea I never thought of.
A.E. stopped by last night on his way home from the St. Nick, and we sat on the curb in front of my house until 12:30, talking about some of his plans and problems. What a man!
To Gene Staley, time was something to spend with people. Most days his car would be waiting for him outside his office at 4:30, but it was usually 5:30, 6, or 6:30 before Mr. Staley would come ambling out, after swapping tales with a factory worker, department head, or vice president.
The one thing that always struck me was just a tremendous amount of pride. It wasn't unusual for, many, many people to work Saturdays and to come and to stay late at nights on weekdays. They were just very proud of the company. They were very proud of their jobs. And it was just a tremendous camaraderie with all the employees. And I think that's how we had managed to have generation after generation of families employed there.
His humble beginnings were never forgotten for those around him. A.E. Staley didn't just want opportunities for himself. He wanted opportunities for his employees.
One thing that they did that I liked was you could save vacation time. And this helped me when I was building my house. I was getting 3 weeks vacation, and I would just save one and carry over. And when I get 7 or 8 weeks vacation, they'd let me cash them in.
That was a big deal because nobody had done that. For a long time, nobody even offered vacations, let alone a paid vacation. The comfort of other people, not just thinking of other people, but their comfort, their quality of life was enhanced because of the things he came up with that were just not done, just not practiced.
When one company family fell on hard times in their personal life, they found they couldn't afford to feed their 4 children. They considered taking them to an orphanage. A.E. Staley personally brought them food.
They didn't have anything. They were to the point of starving at times. He would come to the door and have the groceries. And even at one point, my grandmother, back then, they didn't have dentists, and she needed some false teeth. And I remember my mother saying he paid for those for her to be able to get. I just can't imagine, to have a boss take care of you like that.
It wasn't just his own employees he looked after. A.E. would find a way to help anyone. His good friend, Harry Castley, knew a man named Carl Gilbert, whose family lost a grain business to a fire.
Harry heard what happened to Grandpa Carl's family, and he said, I've talked to A.E. He's interested in somebody that knows about grain elevators. Why don't you come here? Because I think A.E. will hire you. So he did, and he moved his family here.
Well, I thought it was fine, and it was giving people a lot of work at that time. He employed a lot of people, and even members of the family. That's one thing he was noted for. He didn't cut you out if you wanted a job there and you had somebody already in the family there. It's not like other places. I thought he had a tender heart.
Never heard anything negative about the A.E. Staley Company from my father. And of course, my dad was an African American. He was one of the first black chemists at A.E. Staley Company. He never really talked about any type of prejudice. He never talked about being treated any differently, and he always felt welcome. When we think about A.E. Staley Company and its integral part in the vitality of the city of Decatur over the years can never be discounted, not just for what it's done for my family, but for so many other families in this community that gave them the opportunity to make a good living wage, to be around people that cared about their community, and also the fact that they could call a place home for 40 years and retire.
He thought about his employees and thought about their lives, not just what can they do for me. I mean, obviously that was the main consideration. He's a company man. He needs to make money, but I think he said if we don't take care of our employees, they're not going to take care of us.
When you drive by Staley, it's kind of like an enigma, right? It's like buildings and it's smoky, and you don't think about the people that work there, right? You lift back the fog And then you find out the number of families that have been touched by this company is mind-blowing.
His family was settled, his company was growing, he had a fine life. But Mr. Staley wanted that for his employees as well. The Staley Fellowship Club, founded in 1917, offered a strong social life, a family outside of work with dances, dinners, and sports teams for all employees. Years later, a women's club was added. It was another pioneering effort in corporate management that made it one of the most important features in the history of the company. Belonging to the Fellowship Club allowed the company to provide work benefits. It was something most companies talked about but failed to do in America. In 1910, President Taft proposed legislation for paid sick time for employees. It never passed. The initiation fee for the club was set at 50 cents and dues at 50 cents per month. It was decided that a $5 a week sick benefit would be paid and a $100 death benefit. Then there was the fun of the Fellowship Club picnic called the Staley Picnic. There were sporting events, contests, music, and a variety of food. It would grow throughout the years to have more than 5,000 people attend, all paid for by A.E. himself. A.E. also led the way with the Staley Fellowship Journal. It combined company news and safety reminders. The journal featured advice from the Staley Fire Department for employees to use on the job, as well as photographs and stories highlighting workers and their families. The journal received national honors in 1923. The magazine was a photo album showing the good life of Staley employees, the cars they were driving, the homes they lived in, the vacations, and the life that Staley employees were living and living well.
And you can see it in the Staley Journal. Healthcare. If you're sick, you will hold on to your job. It was pretty excellent.
One thing about A.E. Staley that I do recall is that he treated his employees like his own family.
It was just very American. You work hard at a hard job. I mean, these were not easy jobs that people had in the manufacturing plant.
He employed so many people. People were in awe of him. This man pays my bills. This man takes care of my family. This man allowed me to buy a house in an area nearby so that I could walk to work, or it was a short drive for me, and put my house in the Staley Journal. They were kind of in awe of him, and the whole area was.
And so it really does bring people together, that camaraderie and that feeling of this is not just a place to work. It's a place where people care about other people.
A.E.'s purchase of his plant in 1909 didn't just come with a lot of rundown buildings. It came with a water problem. He needed 12 million gallons of water a day to run the plant.
The present system is entirely inadequate.
In the fall of 1919, Staley was given permission to create a temporary dam and build a permanent pumping station, but it wasn't enough. The pump house was more than a mile from the Sangamon River. The river didn't have enough water to keep up with the company and the city, yet the city took water without asking. They said the company didn't give them enough. For A.E. Staley, after all he had invested, the city's action made the mild-mannered entrepreneur hot.
If the city leaders had not followed his lead and his vision to build Lake Decatur, he was going to pack the Staley Manufacturing Company up and move to Peoria. And, that might have been a little threat, but it was probably a really big threat because Peoria's got a river.
That isn't an idle bluff. It's just the truth. And probably that's why it was an argument that carried so much weight with the city council. He wasn't just trying to manipulate them or push them in his direction. He was telling them something that was just evident. He needs the water, they need the water, and if he can't get the water, he's going to have to go somewhere else.
A.E. Staley was already thinking ahead. He purchased 80 acres of land in Peoria before the council made their final decision. It had all the water he would need from the Illinois River.
We had to create this lake because Mr. Staley wanted it, and thank goodness he did.
And the city is growing, so the city also needs it. So in true Staley fashion, Staley recognizes that there is something here that could be mutually beneficial to both parties.
Construction on the lake began in 1920. It was the largest man-made lake in Illinois. The pumping station, which included an employee clubhouse, was nearly completed by the time the permanent dam was started in June 1920. Once finished, people could reach the clubhouse by boat, train, and boardwalk. It was dedicated at a New Year's Eve party in 1921. Nearly 300 people attended. It was truly a place of beauty and entertainment for Staley employees. The furniture for the Fellowship Club was crafted from old oak staves from a distillery in Kentucky. The material was made available after the Volstead Act, which began prohibition in America.
Staley never missed the opportunity to crown functionality with glory. I mean, this was just a pump. You see one in every large body of water. It was a pump. He decided, hey, let's do something with this. Let's put a banquet house on the water, on the lake. For years, the employees were able to have, birthday parties, wedding receptions, work functions. I know it was the Staley Fellowship Club's office, and it was opulent. This thing was, unbelievable with all the marble floors and the woodworking, and people still talk about it to this day.
The clubhouse was the center of activity during the Lake Decatur celebration. It went on for 4 days, starting Independence Day, July of 1923. There was a parade, swimming contests, dancing, fireworks, and a boat carnival. The festivities made headlines when a 19-year-old broke the world record for the 500-meter freestyle swim. AE awarded him a silver trophy and $200. The winner's name was Johnny Weissmuller. Later, the world would know him on the silver screen as Tarzan. It was a time of great growth for the city and the company. In 1920, James M. Cox won the presidential nomination for the Democratic Party. His running mate was 38-year-old Franklin Delano Roosevelt of New York. The A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company was one of the stops for his campaign. After visiting the plant, Mr. Roosevelt and his wife Eleanor spent time with Mr. Staley and Emma.
She was there, and it was Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt. And it was dinner, and the conversation apparently just became very animated. And my grandfather was enjoying the conversation so much, he called the director of the Wabash Railroad and had them hold the train until he was done conversing with Mr. Roosevelt at that time. And finally, the Wabash people called and said, we have to get the train on track to Chicago. And so reluctantly, as it was told to me, my grandfather let Mr. Roosevelt go.
12 years later, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected 32nd President of the United States. The Staley Fellowship Club continued to offer employees benefits while on the job. But AE wanted members to have benefits when they were not at work. In a meeting in 1917, it was decided to organize athletic teams.
You feel beholden when you employ so many people in such a small place that it's important to provide outlets. And it's not just sports, too, right? It's fellowship. They'd have everything from choirs to all sorts of other athletic clubs to other ways for people just to socialize together. So it's not just a job, it becomes almost a way of life.
Staley was a sports fan. First and foremost, he was a fan of the games. He was a real sports fan, not one of these guys who gets rich and goes, I want to own a sports team. He was a real sports fan.
This began decades of company-sponsored teams for activities like basketball, bowling, golf, softball, handball, and soccer. It also changed the future of what would become professional football.
They really were almost their own sports network, to a certain extent, or league, with a bunch of different sports in it that, the local papers covered. And it was like, to the people in Decatur, a professional league.
A lot of these industrialists like A.E. Staley or Carnegie and the Vanderbilts, they were, after they were building their business, they were also focused on how do we make sure that the welfare of our employees is the best that it can be. And so a lot of them started to create athletic clubs that were allowing their employees to then go, work out or play baseball, be on football teams. And so you really started to see this rise in athletic leagues, mainly based around these factories.
In the company's first years of sports, nothing received more attention than the Staley baseball team. The Staleys got a late start organizing their team. They played their starting game without a single practice and finished the season with 16 wins, 8 losses, and 1 tie. Baseball's popularity was growing, and manager Jack Fletcher announced that the job was getting too big. He was resigning at the end of the season to focus on his work at the plant. A.E. Staley made a move that would eventually put the Staley name in National Baseball history. Staley thought Joe McGinnity was a perfect choice to come back to his hometown after spending years playing Major League ball.
Staley offered him the job for managing and being in charge of the baseball team, and I think he found that very welcome.
McGinnity became the face of Staley baseball. He managed the team and continued to pitch. Everyone knew him by the nickname he'd earned in the major leagues, the Iron Man.
So in a 10-year major league span from 1899 to 1908, he pitched about 3,400 innings. He's often noted for being one of the few pitchers who would run both ends of a doubleheader. That happened 5 times in his career, and actually in the season of 1903, just at the end of the season alone, he did it 3 times, I think, in the month of August.
The season's highlight was a May 29th exhibition game with the Chicago White Sox on Staley Field. But it was a game that almost never happened. The White Sox were in first place in their division. The Cleveland Indians were in second place. The teams were scheduled to play a doubleheader the day after the White Sox were in Decatur. Once the White Sox realized the schedule, they wanted to cancel.
The White Sox were in a fairly tight pennant race through the entire 1919 season. They pulled away in the closing weeks of the 1919 season to capture the American League pennant. But they were holding off challenges from Cleveland and the New York Yankees, and the White Sox team of that era would play in local towns and cities. And it was a way of building goodwill and expanding the fan base. It was an excellent way of marketing the product, which in this case was Major League Baseball.
Gene Staley, always a man of his word, would not hear of any changes to his game. It would simply take some persuasion. Staley talked with Charles Comiskey and eventually sent G.E. Chamberlain and Joe McGinnity to Chicago to finish negotiations and to let him know that tickets were sold and new bleachers were built.
Staley did not want to disappoint the fans of Decatur.
In true gentlemanly fashion, A.E. Staley offered his facilities for the players to eat, relax, and change after the game. He also arranged for the Wabash Railroad to provide a special car for the team.
The Chicago White Sox leave Decatur with 7 runs against the Staleys. 3,000 fans were wowed by both teams at Staley Field.
The White Sox team of that era had already been to a World Series and won the World Series in 1917. They were looking forward to the 1919 World Series upcoming. The fact that the Decatur team held them scoreless for 3 innings is quite remarkable.
Staley found more opportunities for his baseball team when he was named president of the new League of Industrial Teams.
Our association, while it has ample financial strength to stand alone, is strongly desirous of working with the professional leagues in the most amicable and harmonious manner. You will find us always willing and anxious to cooperate to the fullest extent in the maintenance of clean, high-grade sport.
The Staley Starch Makers had a debut season of industrial victories with a record of 40 wins, 24 losses, and 1 tie. A.E. knew his players had potential to do even more with the sport, like Charlie Dressen, who later managed the Washington Senators. Buster Woodworth eventually played for the White Sox, and local all-star Randy Young was on the mound from Millikan University.
Randy Young just loved playing sports, playing baseball. And throughout his whole life, he enjoyed doing that and was probably pretty grateful to get a job from A.E. Staley, just basically to get a paycheck while he could, just play baseball or basketball and football.
In early 1920, A.E. and Joe McGinnity received a tip on another promising player. Mr. Staley asked G.E. Chamberlain to meet with a young bridge engineer working on a Chicago railroad. Chamberlain could tell the young man had what A.E. Staley was looking for and came back to Decatur to add him to the payroll. His name was George Hollis. With new players and a new manager, nothing was spared to celebrate opening day of Staley baseball. In 1920, the Staley Journal reported, "It is doubtful if an industrial plant in the United States ever staged a more pretentious opening than that which took place at Staley Field on the afternoon of April 10th. The day began with a streetcar parade through Decatur, which included the Staley Band and the Staley Booster Club. Once at Staley Field, Mr. Staley, his son Rawl, the team mascot, and manager Joe McGinnity led the procession. They were followed by the team, ready to go in new uniforms. As the national anthem played, the American flag was raised. Even the baseball wives took part. Joe McGinnity's wife Marguerite made strawberry shortcake for every member of the team who had a home run. Avery McGlade got the first home run of the season and the first shortcake. At the same time, Staley had another piece of baseball history put into his hands. This silver cup was given to Mr. Staley from Joe McGinnity. It came from the 1900 National League Championship, the precursor to the World Series.
It was the last kind of inter-series postseason series that ever existed, of course. American League starts the next year. World Series begins in 1903.
McGinnity pitched for the National League's Brooklyn Superbas. He won 3 games of 4 to take the series against the defending league champions, Pittsburgh. McGinnity was knocked unconscious in Game 1 and recovered to finish pitching. The Superbas won the game and won the trophy, the Telegraph Chronicle Cup.
In honor of that, his teammates basically dedicated the victory of the cup for the team to him, and it stayed in his possession then until he gave it to Staley in 1920.
The trophy was kept on display at the Fellowship Club until A.E. Staley Jr. donated it to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1965.
I know my father was so proud and just spoke in glowing terms about his father's love for the sport, and he would never miss a game and very often would be at practices.
Staley welcomed all teams that could challenge their skills. The Chicago American Giants proved that in July 1921.
They were pretty much the New York Yankees of their time, I guess. You know, Rube Foster was the owner and manager of the team. He was a player-owner. But they won 7 pennants. They won 3 championships. And they were pretty much, the dominant force in the Negro League Baseball League, from that time.
The Giants were the defending champions of the Negro National Baseball League. Their 3-day visit to Staley Field left 1 win and 2 losses for the Staley team. The games were covered in depth by the press.
It showed, one, that, here you had probably the greatest Negro League team that ever played. Here they come to Decatur, Illinois, to play. And not even against another major league team, but against a team of players that were put together by a sports enthusiast, Mr. Staley. He went out and got the best players that he could get that weren't major league players, and I'm sure, for them playing against the New American Giants, it was big for them too, because it was probably a validation for them as well to say, you know what, we held our own against probably the best players of all time. So it was great for both parties, actually.
While baseball was making headlines, another sport was taking off in America, and Staley wanted a part in it. The Staley football team was also part of the Fellowship Club. Managers James Cook and Robert Brannan put together a solid team for their debut 1919 season. The squad had stars galore.
Mintum intercepts for a 20-yard touchdown to beat Stonington 50-3 in front of 1,000 fans at Staley Field. The final as the Decatur Staley shut out Staunton 89 for Lanham. 2 touchdowns for Mintum. 2 touchdowns. Champaign 11 leaves Staley Field shut out by the Scottsville Independents in front of 5,000 fans. And the back present pulls off his fake split to help win this game 21. The Aviators scoreless here at Staley Field, scoring 61 points.
Imagine, though, you have no padding. You have a leather helmet covering your head.
And the final game of the season, the Staleys faced the Arcola Independents in Decatur. Charlie Brezen was a standout with quick action and fake split play that sent him over the goal line.
Final score was 41-0. The Arcola community came together to set up a revenge game. They reached out to Dutch Sterneman, a halfback at the University of Illinois. He had just finished the last game of the 1919 season.
I think it was November 30th, 1919. It was a Sunday. Supposed to be at 1 o'clock, and the Arcola team, led by Sterneman, was set up and ready to play. And A.E. Staley, catching wind that this was going on and that Sterneman was kind of building this team out of university players, he didn't want his employees to go into a buzzsaw, so to speak. And so he held his team back, and the game never happened. But Sterneman, having his players there, they were all expecting to get some money from the gate receipts. And the Arcola banker who had put this together through Sterneman, he ended up reaching out to A.E. Staley saying, look, it's harvest time and these boys came down to play football and you didn't show. And, Staley, to his credit, he said, okay, well, ask them what they want and send me the bill.
The season was a great success as the Starch Makers finished 6-1. Walking away with the title as the state's top industrial team, the Staley Starch Makers, or Decatur Staleys, were champions. That year was such a triumph that the company held a surprise Christmas party. The employees presented Staley with a gold watch and then serenaded the boss in a song especially arranged for the occasion.
The wonderful year of 1919, now drawing to a close, has been a most prosperous year for all of us. Our yields have exceeded all records, our profits have been ample, our plants have doubled in value, and our athletic teams have been immense. Through you, we, your employees, are prosperous.
A.E. Staley responded with tears and pledged always to work for the mutual interest of the company and the employees. He liked the attention the football team brought to the company and to his products.
He started to recognize that there was a lot of demand for entertainment. And maybe as this factory team was being developed, employees' families are coming out and townspeople are coming out, and all of a sudden you look at it and you say, well, yeah, I need to put Staley Starch Company on my jersey, or there's a lot of things that we can promote for the betterment of this business.
To think that a sports team could become a marketing arm of his company, he was ahead of his time.
It was definitely a unique thing to do. And, I think it also was a great benefit to the community as well, to kind of give them something else in their lives, to root for and to identify with. Starch is not the most flamboyant, product out there. So you do have to be a little bit creative.
There must be better ways to promote the starch business.
Staley knew he wanted to grow football along with baseball. The company would continue to sponsor them. He needed someone who really knew the game to develop a semi-pro team.
Being that visionary, he said, okay, well, I kind of see the future of where this professional football thing's going. So he reached out to Sterneman and said, hey, are you interested in working here at the Staley Company and helping with our football team, maybe recruiting some of the guys that you had brought down to Arcola?
My Uncle Dutch thought about it, and he says, but I've still got to finish my engineering degree. And A.E. Staley said, well, look at that plant out there. He said, do you see that chimney? He said, you can come to work for me, and you can work in that plant, and you can organize a team and play football. And my Uncle Dutch thought about that. And he said, I want to finish, at Illinois. And he says, I've, got to go back. But he said, I am interested.
Dutch had to turn him down. But that's when Staley got the tip about the promising young man in Chicago who came to play baseball for him that season. George Halas graduated from the University of Illinois in 1917, having made a name for himself in football, baseball, and basketball. His next step was the Navy, where he joined the football squad at Great Lakes Naval Training Base. This team beat Notre Dame and won the 1919 Rose Bowl game. Halas then made a try at baseball with the Yankees, but an injury ended his pro career.
So Mr. Staley hires George Halas, and he says, I want you to start a company football team. I think he said a company baseball team also. And you can hire players as Staley manufacturing employees, and you can practice on company time, and you can play your games right across the street here at Staley Field.
Halas started working at the company's mill house on March 18, 1920. He finished the baseball season with the Staley team, hitting over 300. When the season ended, A.E. Staley asked Halas to put together the best industrial football team around. Halas went out on what some have called the first professional football recruiting journey in history. When Halas returned, he reported to Mr. Staley that he now had a team that would draw standing room-only crowds. The agreement with the recruited players provided they would enjoy the stability of a regular salary based on their work week at the Staley Manufacturing Company. This would also include 2 hours daily training as part of the football club. Additionally, they would receive a portion of the gate at the end of the season. Halas kept some of the 1919 players, drafted Patty Driscoll of the Chicago Cardinals, and added a string of college football stars. Halas also brought in a player Staley already knew, a young man everyone called Dutch.
It was June of 1920 that Sterneman ended up graduating with his engineering degree and started working at the Staley Company and learning about combustion engineering, then got involved with the football team.
In September of 1920, Halas and a company safety manager, Morgan O'Brien, made a trip to Canton, Ohio, to attend a meeting of all managers of the leading professional football teams in the country. The meeting was called by Jim Thorpe, and out of it was formed the American Conference of Professional Football Teams, later known as the American Professional Football Association.
George Halas goes to Canton, Ohio, and sits on a running board of a Hupmobile in Ralph Hayes' Hupmobile showroom, and they form what is now the National Football League. So the NFL had its origins in Canton, but also right here in Decatur.
One of the most important rules passed at the meeting, still rigidly enforced today, is prohibiting professional teams from tampering with college players.
It was against the rules to pay players, and professional football was kind of seen as a negative. George Halas and Ralph Hay kind of pushed the momentum to form a league, and they met a couple miles from the hall to form the NFL, and that's where we get the ball rolling with professional football.
With the popularity of the game growing, Mr. Staley announced he had been approached by the Chicago Cubs to use Cubs Park, now Wrigley Field, as their home for the 1920 season.
There are some stories of when the Staley's play in Chicago, that their scores are put up as the telephone transmission is sent down, and somebody kind of yells out what's going on during the game if it's a really an important game.
And that's the game. The Decatur Staleys, led by Captain George Hallis, whip the Moline Tractors 20-0 before a crowd of Steve Block on Drew Vessler leads to a 44-yard touchdown sprint for Jimmy Consolman as the Decatur Staleys jolt the Rock Island Independence Park in Chicago in front of 5,000 fans. Todd Pierce runs 55 yards for a touchdown with a field goal by Jimmy Consolman. The Decatur Staleys defeat the Chicago Tigers 10-0.
The lineup was a success, and the team ended with another winning season as Western Division champions. There was a playoff game with the Eastern champions, the Akron Indians, but the game ended in a tie. Each player received $2,200 for their work on the gridiron. They were the highest salaried industrial team in the country, and the company felt it that season, losing more than $14,000.
There's just something in George Hallis's blood that he just loved football, that he just couldn't let it go. He had a dream like, why can't we be just as great as baseball?
Gene Staley wasn't the sort to give up and worked with Hallis to give football another try.
And he couldn't make it better for him. And he had a vision. But to be that active in sports and to be that paternal to his employees, he must have liked the game, and he must have liked what he saw that it developed in people.
That season, as the Staleys played in Chicago, crowd size more than doubled to 11,000, a number not possible in Decatur. So in the best interest of the team, they moved permanently and became the Chicago Staleys.
Well, they had a pretty successful season in 1920. But Mr. Staley knew, maybe before even George Hallis knew, that the future of the team was in Chicago.
In Decatur, there might have been 1,000 or 2,000 people who would go to a Staley game, whereas in Chicago you might get 10 or 15,000 people go to the game at Cubs Park.
In addition to the concern of financing a football team, the mixing of professional athletics and the operation of a factory were causing strains in the workplace. Instead of boosting morale, the sports program was causing dissension and jealousy. A cartoon in the 1920 Staley Journal summed it up.
Staley taking care of the baby football. Lots of the other products were jealous.
A.E. Staley gave George Hallis $5,000 to move the team to Chicago, with the condition that the team keep the Staley name for 1 year. Hallis agreed, and the team became the Chicago Staleys. Hallis and Dutch Sterneman became partners, and they began to lay the groundwork for the 1922 season.
Staley giving the Hallis and Sterneman that $5,000 to continue to succeed and keep the ball rolling for what they accomplished during the 1920 season, I think was very valuable. Staley saw a new opportunity to market his company in a larger city. And so the fact that he talked to Hallis and said, hey, we'll do this, but I want you to keep the Staley name, for one season, that 1921 season, they were the Chicago Staleys, and then the 1922 season, they ultimately changed their name to the Chicago Bears.
It's really remarkable that George Hallis just always was so appreciative and so complimentary of my father, because he realized that A.E. Sr. launched his career. They had a Staley Day at Wrigley Field, and my father and a number, Ed Scheider and a number of the other executives went up, and it just made it so accommodating and so very warm.
Once George Hallis recognized that it was the 50th anniversary of Staley's, he wanted to do something for the Staley Company. He specifically said, without the Staleys, there would be no Chicago Bears. The company and the Bears get the University of Illinois band to come up. They get, trainload of people to come up. They get as many of the former Staleys as they can to come to the game. And they played the Baltimore Colts and used that as the Staley date because A.E. Staley came from Baltimore.
In 2019, the Chicago Bears came back home to Decatur to celebrate the team's 100th anniversary.
We know we have fans all over the world, but it was very gratifying to see how much Decatur appreciates the Bears. And the feeling is mutual because Decatur is the birthplace of the Bears. We're mindful of that, and we're grateful for that.
Their mascot's named Staley the Bear. So that is, I think that's really a feather in the cap for this community.
That's pretty cool that the Chicago Bears originated in Decatur, thanks to Mr. Staley.
After football had moved and baseball had been canceled, Staley Field was made available to the new Decatur Commodores of the 3I League until a new stadium for their league could be built. A.E. donated $2,500 for the new facility, named Fans Field. He threw out the first pitch in the new ballpark in 1924. A.E. had peace of mind letting go of his athletic teams because at the same time he was exploring an expansion in another area. Something significant had been planted in him as a boy when he met that missionary at church camp. It would make the 1920s a roaring success at the A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company.
Without question, and if you look throughout history, a lot of people get the same information, but how few actually take that same information and do something with it. In Mr. Staley's case, he certainly did great things with those seeds that were planted in him as a youngster.
In 1914, only 2,000 acres of soybeans were planted in Illinois. There was no large-scale processing, but A.E. had a vision backed by careful research. Still, he was taking a leap of faith.
He was successful with the corn. And you think to yourself, why would you want to then try to add this huge expense? At the time, soybeans, right now, that's a common word in our lexicon. Everybody knows what a soybean is. At that point, soybeans weren't something that people knew about.
The introduction of the soybean was a great complement to what farmers were raising in corn. And what's unique about soybeans is the fact that it has its roots develop or a fixed nitrogen into the soil. And in the early days, there was not commercial nitrogen. So the soybean was what fed, if you will, that corn crop. And so the rotation, where if you raise corn year after year after year, it's hard on the soil, but you could rotate between corn and soybeans, and that made the soil, it was better for the soil, better for yields, more productive, and in the end, more profit for farmers and the Staley Manufacturing Company.
By 1922, enough beans were being harvested for Staley to announce his plans for the first major soybean processing plant in the nation. That plant began processing beans on September 30th, 1922.
A.E. Staley not only had this vision, but he took it one step further. He guaranteed a market for every farmer. He said, I promise you, I will buy every bushel of beans you produced. And he did. And that gave farmers the certainty to go ahead and try this new crop that no one had planted before.
That first soybean plant used the expeller process, which uses hydraulic presses or screw presses to process the beans. But more beans were needed, so Staley undertook an information campaign to encourage farmers to grow more. He used letters, bulletins, pamphlets, and newspaper stories. But the company's most ambitious undertaking was a combined effort with the University of Illinois, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Illinois Central Railroad. It was called the Soil and Soybean Special, and it made stops across the state from Galena in the north to Metropolis in the south.
There's a story about him going by train to different communities saying, if you grow soybeans, I will sell them, and really convincing people to believe in what he was trying to do. But he took our railroad industry, which was in good shape for the day, and really helped it explode into an incredible industry. And that's still true to this day.
So A.E. Staley had the vision of this crop being successful in the Midwest, and he knew it wasn't a known commodity here. And so he took it upon himself to partner with the University of Illinois and the Illinois Central Railroad and take his message out to the producers and clearly explain to them the advantages of not only growing soybeans, but then also feeding that rich protein that soybean creates back to their animals. And it was such a huge win-win-win as we talk about vertical integration. It was just really a breakthrough for the American farmer.
The soybean special had 6 cars, an office car for officials to eat and sleep, a car to exhibit soybean products, a lecture car, 2 cars for motion pictures, and a car for soil testing and displaying insects that cause damage to the plant. More than 33,000 people visited the train. It traveled 2,500 miles, making 105 scheduled stops. But the company's biggest loss was 1921 and 1922, when there was a loss of over $1 million. Staley needed the daily invoices totaled each hour so he could meet payroll and corn drafts. There was a period in 1922 when finances were so tight that it was necessary to take each day's invoices to a finance discount company in St. Louis.
I was selected personally to take certified copies of these invoices to St. Louis daily on the late afternoon train, and I was given a check for the total of these invoices less the factoring fee, which I brought back on the midnight train. This check was deposited in Decatur when the bank opened to cover corn drafts and payroll and other checks to be issued that day. It paid off, and never again was the existence and growth of Mr. Staley Sr.'s masterpiece threatened through lack of financial reserves.
It accomplished what Staley had predicted. The A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company did indeed become the first large-scale processor of soybeans in America. As manufacturing began to increase, Staley persuaded farmers to use soybean meal in their mixed feed for livestock. Historically, soybeans in the United States had been planted only as forage for farm animals. Staley knew this would be a decisive strategy for the creation of a solid market for soy meal.
You do not go around the country and have people plant a brand new crop on the guarantee that you will buy what they grow unless you're honest and they believe you, and that's bankable.
In 1922, Staley became the champion of the soybean when he proclaimed, "The day will come when our plant will process more soybeans than corn." By the 1930s, Illinois produced more than 50% of the nation's soybeans, and Decatur earned the title of the soybean capital of the world. In the years to follow, the Staley Company continued to create new products using soybeans. Staley knew that perseverance and patience would lead to success and profits. His determination to use soybeans set the standard for American farming.
Today, Illinois is the #1 soybean producer in the country. And here in the state of Illinois, 60% of our soybeans are exported into the international marketplace. And it's all because of a vision a guy named A.E. Staley had 110 years ago.
As the company grew, so did the Staley name in society and the social status of their children. As adults, their social circles were at the Country Club of Decatur. It was no surprise that 2 of Jean and Emma's children would marry into the same prominent family.
These manufacturing giants like the Muellers and the Staleys would all move in the same circles. They were involved in a lot of the same things, the same kinds of clubs.
The Mueller family owned the Mueller Company. Hieronymus Mueller and his wife Frederica were German immigrants who started out in a small gun shop. The company would garner more than 500 patents, including water pressure regulators, faucet designs, the first sanitary drinking fountain, a roller skate design, and a bicycle kickstand. The company invented the pressure-regulated gate valve for the Panama Canal. Mueller fire hydrants can be seen all across America. Hieronymus Mueller imported a Benz automobile from Germany, and together with his sons, began refining it, which led to automotive patents. These innovations led to his Mueller-Benz winning the first unofficial road race in America in 1895. Then it finished second in the first official race held a few weeks later in Chicago. In 1896, the first U.S. presidential candidate to ride in an automobile was William Jennings Bryan when he visited Decatur. He was escorted around town by Hieronymus Mueller in a Mueller-Benz. Ruth Staley married Hieronymus and Frederica's grandson, Ebert Mueller, in 1924. Their wedding took place in the Staley Mansion on College Hill. They had one child, Robert. The marriage didn't last, but their son, Robert's career, took center stage.
Because Ebert and Ruth, divorced early on, Robert Eugene will spend a lot of time with grandparents. Obviously, Emma is a pianist, so you know that she is probably sitting at the piano with him.
Emma's pride would shine in 1948 when she attended a concert in Miami which featured Robert. She sent the program to his mother, Ruth, with a note.
We all drove down to Palm Beach last night to hear Bob in his piano recital. He played beautifully, a very difficult program. I was very proud of him. Love, Emma.
Lenore Mueller was Ebert Mueller's cousin. She was the daughter of Henry and Ora Mueller and granddaughter of Hieronymus and Frederica Mueller. Her sister died at the age of 3, so Lenore was doted on by her parents. Her father died when she was 18, but she became the center of the Decatur social scene. One of the city's most eligible bachelors, A.E. Staley Jr., Gus, knew her well.
Lenore grew up literally just around the corner from this home. So not only did they probably move in the same social circles, they were in the same neighborhood. And so, I'm sure that's how they met one another. But I also have no doubt that both families were very content with the idea of their children marrying and building a common life together. It really was the biggest wedding that ever took place in this town, even to this day. Not unlike something like a Rockefeller and Vanderbilt wedding. And even though they were in very different business sectors, the Staley being in the agribusiness and the Mueller Company being a water and gas company, it united these two families.
In 1928, Decatur needed a new Masonic temple. A.E. Staley was the first to step up to help. He was most proud of being a Mason. He was a 32nd degree Mason, the highest honor.
The Masonic Temple was it still is a treasure, but it was an incredible place for not just activities of the Masons, but it was a huge social place to go, and for performing arts, for dinners, for banquets, for you name it, it happened there. It's a giant building. I mean, it's enormous. The rooms are beautiful, and it's like stepping back in time. And you go in and you think you can almost hear what the parties were like.
The cornerstone laying ceremony and a parade was held on March 24, 1928. More than 3,000 people attended. Some even perched from a tree to see this treasure open its doors to the city.
Back when A.E. Staley was a member, the Decatur Masonic Temple was the hotspot of Decatur. It was basically the civic center of Decatur, Illinois. They had circuses, events, you named it, it went on here. When the temple was built, there was over 6,000 Masonic Mason members here.
A.E. was the largest donor to the building, a price tag of $12 million today, and Staley took on most of the cost. But his support didn't stop with donations.
He drove membership through the roof as well, because who wouldn't want to be a member of the same Blue Lodge as A.E. Staley?
Several men from the Staley Company joined the ranks, including Samuel Morthland Sr., pumping station manager, and H.T. Morris, manager of feed sales. G.E. Chamberlain was an active member. His loyalty to the fraternity is still remembered today. The Masonic Library houses books from his extensive collection. Staley's dedication was honored when a portrait by renowned artist Robert Marshall Root was commissioned. Today it is displayed in the Staley Lounge.
The Masonic Temple is the precursor to the office building. Staley is actively involved in the temple. And when you look at the first plans for the Staley office building, they look like the Masonic Temple. So I really think he's watching what's going on at the Masonic Temple, the building crew that's working there, how they're putting things together. He's sending men to be on the job to help out with the building. Part of that was in anticipation for his own building, but also by sending men on the Staley clock, he's also reducing the building costs for the temple as well.
One of the fastest growing areas of the company was the railroad. In true Staley style, the A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company took their railroad a step further by building their own roundhouse. Train engines could rotate and switch directions, saving the company time and money.
They had so much, as the company grew, the logistics of moving just the freight cars around between all the different facilities and staging things, that they quickly, especially in the 1920s, needed their own operation. That was what the A.E. Staley determined that the most efficient way, very similar to Henry Ford, that he just took on, solved all the problems that by having our own switching operation.
Years later, the company equipped the plant with a train car dumping system. Cars were raised at an angle to quickly unload the product. It was valuable technology that gained the attention of railroad executives. In 1927, A.E. Staley became a director of the Wabash Railroad.
So he was very well respected with the Wabash Railroad.
The Wabash executive cars provided every luxury for a businessman. Whether traveling across the state or across the country, they provided a full dining experience, a sleeping suite, and business services. By 1928, railroads in Decatur had grown so fast that the layout was becoming confusing.
In the beginning, Decatur was just this little bitty farm town. That's all it was. The railroads changed everything for Decatur because the population just exploded over, just a few decades. It jumped into this city where transportation was everything, and you had the ability to not just move people, but you had the ability to move goods.
The city couldn't keep up with the growth. There was a safety concern. As the plant was growing, people had to cross railroad tracks on foot. One of these crossings was at the A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company on 22nd Street. Mr. Staley proposed an overpass. It was a complicated negotiation. 4 entities shared the cost of the viaduct: the Staley Company, Wabash Railroad, the City of Decatur, and Decatur Township. It took 4 years from conception to completion.
Staley's very aware of the aspect of safety, whether it's in his manufacturing process or the community. They get together and they decide on that something needs to be done, and they contemplate several different options, including an underground tunnel. But the most viable option is creating a viaduct.
That's another example of Staley needing something for his company and saying, well, this will help the whole town.
The overpass was officially named the Staley Viaduct, and on July 3, 1928, a grand ceremony opened the new pathway with a parade and a presentation, including Decatur Mayor O.W. Smith, A.E. Staley, and his son, Gus. Thousands of cars crossed the viaduct that night to christen the new road. It was a view of the city they had never seen. Employees enjoyed the cover it gave for their year-round game of horseshoes. In 1929, they began a tournament there that gained the interest of the company and the city. They continued that tournament for many years. Staley never forgot about the North Carolina farm. After his mother passed away in 1907, he purchased the property from his siblings. Arthur continued to work on the farm. Gene bought the best equipment available for his brother. The Staleys had a long history of taking care of others and helping the community. When bouts of typhoid fever hit the area, the Staley family always provided their ice house to help.
To have an ice house on a family farm was something of a major event, and that they were in a position to help with that typhoid epidemic and bringing down the fever of those patients is absolutely heaven sent for a community that would not have had an opportunity to fight it without it.
Well, it was so impressive, and as a child, I would love to go there because no other place was really quite like it. They had lots of equipment, and it was new tractors, which nobody had that kind of equipment around that I knew of. And to see a Franklin air-cooled automobile was interesting to see.
Growth continued in the company through the Roaring 20s. A hospital was proudly opened to treat any employee. A new group insurance plan soon followed. The company faced an unexpected loss when G.E. Chamberlain died in 1926. His position was filled by A.E.'s son, Gus. A.E. Staley Jr. joined the company in 1925 as a superintendent. Educated at boarding schools and the University of Pennsylvania, his brilliance would help lead the company for decades. A new laboratory was opened, but most importantly, there were plans. Big plans, as only A.E. Staley could make for a new office building. The price tag was $1 million, $15 million today. Then there was the crash heard around the world. A.E. Staley didn't flinch. He pushed forward with confidence and vision that was unnerving. At that point, it was the best year in the company's history.
The Depression was tough on every community, but I think he saw the big picture. He said, if I start, laying off employees now and folding now, where are we going to be when we come out of this?
He's a very smart man. He made things work. Everybody thought he was crazy when he built that office building.
A.E. wanted a tribute to his employees and the city. He wanted the building made with granite from North Carolina, but the cost would have been astronomical. After being assured it would not decrease the integrity of the building, Mr. Staley finally agreed to use Indiana limestone. But the visible part of the foundation would come from Mount Airy, North Carolina. The foundation of his company's headquarters would be paying tribute to his foundation in North Carolina, where it all began. Custom-woven Oriental rugs were ordered from China, paying tribute to the soybean, the magic bean of his business. There was a cafeteria with a soda fountain available all day. A mural on each wall shows the evolution of corn production. The lobby ceiling includes plaster star molds that were finished with gold and silver leaf that indicate giving life. There are also bronze plates inlaid with the tile on the lobby floor that feature historic images of corn. There was a 3-acre park-like setting with fountains below and gardens on top, just outside of Mr. Staley's office suite. Later, the gardens would be the centerpiece of National Geographic magazine.
As a child, I don't think I realized how neat of a thing it was to have your picture in National Geographic. My mom, she is on the end in the checkered dress. She was with a group of secretaries, and they all went out on the terrace and had their picture taken.
The Wabash Railroad also collaborated with the office building construction. Railways were built right up to the structure, so materials could be offloaded directly to the work site.
As far as shipping commodities if they were building a factory, building a new facility, they'd ship via that railroad, and then they'd ship products out via that railroad as well, and also ship the raw materials in for production.
The press called it the castle in the cornfields. It was not originally conceptualized to have 14 stories as it does today. It was intended to be rectangular with a flat roof. But at Mr. Staley's insistence for grandeur, a tower was added, making it 14 stories high. The image featured here is from an early salesman's photo album used to show potential customers the Staley plant. The tower was completed with a 14-karat gold dome top, so even at night, the building would shine.
When we were kids, when it was really hot in the evening, you would go for a drive. And we always wanted to circle, go over the bridge, see the Staley lights, come back over the bridge, see the Staley lights before we went home.
The administration building was the first to install a system designed to automatically dim and brighten. It was a series of floodlights that move in fluid patterns, making the colors glow and melt. When the lights were turned on, people knew they were witnessing something hardly seen before. In one word, the building was amazing.
Bear in mind that in 1930, there weren't very many buildings in the United States with that kind of a lighting system. So here we've got a lighting system on the Staley office building of the ilk of the Empire State Building in New York City. And here it is in Decatur, Illinois, the heart of corn country.
The Staley building, that in itself is a marvel. When you think about, this is not Chicago, this is Decatur, and that building, you're like, who builds a building like that? I mean, that's grandeur. That was a vision.
When you think just about the building, what is it, the castle in the cornfield?
The castle in the cornfields wasn't the only leap forward Staley made into the new decade. He also reduced the hours of employees by 25%, from 12 to 8, but didn't cut their pay, and added nearly 200 more people to work. This was another $1 million to the annual payroll, staggering figures today. It was a bold and committed move to protect employees in a Depression-era economy.
How lucky to join up with A.E. Staley Sr., who didn't believe in putting people on the street. He did everything in his power to keep things moving properly during the Great Depression. And things were tough for him.
This concern for his employees led to the birth of a new financial institution, the Staley Credit Union. Led by Staley personnel manager Andrew Percival, it was located in the grand lobby of the new office building. Staley employees were now able to save and borrow by combining their resources. Today, the Staley Credit Union operates independently from the company and has grown to assets of $175 million. Gene Staley was honored by those who knew him best. In 1926, a bronze sculpture was presented to the boss from the Staley Fellowship Club. Commissioned from Chicago sculptor Emil Zettler, it still sits in the lobby of the office building today.
That was his pride and joy. And the amount of hours he put into it, in designing it, just from the elevator doors to the lobby, to the woodwork, the attention to detail was just incredible. Everybody that worked in that building just considered it a privilege.
In 1930, A.E. Staley was 63 years old. The crown jewel of his business empire, the new administration building, was a reality. From the beginning, employee safety was the company's priority, highlighted on the cover of the third issue of the Staley Journal in 1917, and emphasized daily throughout the plant.
A.E. Staley was ahead of the curve in their design of their facility and the operation of their facilities. They had safety training for their employees.
When the explosion happened, it was devastating to Mr. Staley.
I can't get it out of my mind. It is a terrible thing.
He had a personal relationship with all of his employees, and he knew them by name. And when that happened, it was devastating, not only because he lost people that he knew and that he cared about, but because a manufacturer, any manufacturer, can't help but question whether everything was done that possibly could have been done.
They had the design of the facility the way it should have been. Employees were trained. They were doing everything they could to prevent the explosion. And cornstarch is one of the most volatile combustible dust there is.
It is the injury to the men that is the worst thing about it. and I hope it wasn't disregard of the safety rules that caused the explosion. A thorough investigation will be made here, not only for the good of our plant, but to help all industries in which flammable dust is found.
While the company was helping to find answers for the industry, Staley knew the priority was taking care of people.
We can easily replace property, but for the men to be killed is awful. We're doing everything we can for them. If they didn't have insurance, we will take care of their dependents.
The safety regulations put in place by OSHA and the recommendations by NFPA and the Chemical Safety Board and other agencies have really helped with explosions, but the threat is still there.
2 weeks before the explosion, Mr. Staley's younger brother Arthur died of an infection following surgery for appendicitis. Just days before, A.E. Staley had visited Arthur, who was recovering on the Staley farm near Julian. The brothers didn't know it would be the last time they would see each other. Gene had taken care of his employees in every way he could. Now it was time to start taking care of himself.
Staley in 1930 took his very first vacation in his entire life. He and Emma went to Florida. There was a reason he decided to do that. He was beginning to have some health issues, and his doctor recommended that he get some rest and relaxation. He was also acutely aware that he didn't know how much longer he was going to be alive. His son Gus will eventually become the leadership for the company, but it wasn't completely clear that that was what was going to happen at first. Staley needed to see Gus in action in order to make sure that he was ready for that responsibility.
He advised Gus carefully as they moved the company through the Depression. Letters back and forth between father and son show the movement of money, goods, and services that propelled the business forward. One thing was always kept clear. A.E. Staley made sure Gus knew, no matter what was going on in the company, their customers came first. This ethic of business was never a setback. In the 1930s, the company's sales grew by $20 million. Gene and Emma rented a large apartment in Florida. The area suited them. By the next year, they purchased their winter home, a grand estate on the Bay of Biscayne. Here, Staley was able to bask in the warm sunshine, stroll on his private waterfront property. Perfect for the man who had worked so hard to have it all. Retirement gave Gene a chance to work on one of his favorite hobbies with the sweet smell of success, growing roses. The Staley Journal in 1922 printed a photo of the Staley Mansion in Decatur with a beautiful arch of Dorothy Perkins roses at the entrance. Staley tended to these roses himself. Emma Staley even put her husband's passion for roses in a poem.
Where roses bloom, I see you stand, the fragrant blossoms in your hand. You help the weakest ones to grow, and in return each tried to show that flowers too may understand. Some sun, some rain, then God's command. So must all life with time expand, for all the winds of heaven blow where roses bloom.
Gene never did things in a small way, and his rose garden in Miami was no exception.
I have got one of the most beautiful gardens this year I have ever had. I've planted out 1,300 rose bushes, and we're now beginning to cut them in considerable quantities. I believe I will raise from 10 to 12,000 long-stemmed roses, which will probably be my greatest harvest. As we've already gathered 1,000 roses, we'll soon be cutting from 150 to 200 long-stemmed roses each day.
When Mr. Staley returned from his first vacation in Florida, he found the office in his suite in the new administration building filled with flowers from company executives and friends. Employees welcomed the boss back with a thank you for sending fruit from his estate. The fruit was so good it was served at the employee cafeteria. Coconuts from the Staley palm trees were the company favorite. Coconut Pie Day was a November tradition for many years. The Staleys loved the Florida weather, but every day wasn't paradise. In 1935, a tropical storm moved in from the northeast, an unusual direction for one to emerge. It was dubbed the Yankee Hurricane. It slammed into Miami with winds at 95 miles an hour, creating a 3-foot storm surge, flooding the city and shattering windows and houses. It remains the only hurricane on record to reach Miami from the northeast in November. This photo was taken at the height of the storm on Biscayne Bay, taken at the home of A.E. Staley. The house stood strong, but the tall palm trees and the rose garden, Staley's passion, took a beating.
It would take about 3 years' growth to get where it was before the hurricane of November 4th.
The worst part of the storm was the loss of life. 6 people died in Miami. Nearly all year, the Staleys were part of the social scene in Miami. Some of their guests included former Ohio governor and 1920 Democratic nominee for president James Cox, U.S. Senator from Illinois James Hamilton Lewis, and humorist George Ade. This note from Emma in December of 1940 accompanied the Christmas check Gene sent his children. This check had gone to Gus.
Noni and Gus, Dad wants me to write you and enclose his Christmas check. He is feeling much better and will go downstairs today. We all send worlds of love and hope you will have a wonderful Christmas and wish we could be together. Much love, Mother.
This would be the last check A.E. Staley ever signed. He was able to enjoy Christmas downstairs with most of his family. The following evening, he was in a perfect setting, enjoying the outdoors of his estate, family by his side. With one breath, he took in the Florida air and went limp. It was a stroke. Gene Staley looked at the love of his life as she knelt next to him and whispered, "Emma, I have had 150 years of living." Then all life drained from him. At age 73, Augustus Eugene Staley Sr. now belonged to history. His health, as with his rise to wealth, had been followed closely by the press. Each day of his illness, updates were reported in the papers. Twice on the day he died, papers reported his condition. The following morning, on December 27th, news of his fate reached everyone.
Wabash had a special train that they had in place just to carry the body of A.E. Staley back. So if they would have literally pulled out all the stops, there would have been no question. The president of the railroad would have just arranged, we need a private train for the Staleys and the family.
On December 30th, more than 2,000 people turned out on a cold Monday to pay their respects to A.E. Staley. His funeral was held at the First Presbyterian Church, and his body lay in state at the Dawson and Wyckoff Funeral Home the day before. The people who came were a true reflection of the kind of life Staley had lived.
I was a kid about 15 when I went with my parents. Oh, it was a beautiful funeral. Hundreds of people streaming through there.
It was just very, very moving, almost like a presidential burial. I mean, it had that kind of emotion among the people.
In Decatur, the flag at the post office flew at half-staff. Western Union stopped service for 1 minute at the hour of the funeral. The offices of the A.E. Staley Manufacturing Company in Decatur and throughout the world were closed. The church held about 600 people, so the services were transmitted to the Masonic Temple next door, where hundreds more attended. It was the largest funeral ever held in Decatur. The church and Masonic Temple were filled with what Staley loved the most: his family, his employees, and flowers.
I never saw so many flowers in a funeral in my life. Banks and banks of them there. And along the aisles at the end of the pews.
More than 300 floral arrangements were on display at the front of the church. Almost all were roses. Illinois Governor John Stell led a group of prominent businessmen and friends of A.E. Staley as pallbearers. The Illinois State Police led the procession from the church to a private service at the mausoleum of Fairlawn Cemetery. Members of an honor guard from the Foreman's Club, the Staley Fellowship Club, and the United Grain Processors Union stood throughout the day to pay tribute to a leader and a friend. A similar memorial service was continued at the mausoleum for several years. At the funeral, Mr. Staley's close friend and attorney, C.C. LaForgie, read a prayer written by Burton Braley. Dear Lord, in the battle that goes on through life, I ask but a field that is fair, a chance that is equal with all in the strife, the courage to strive and to dare. And if I should win, let it be by this code, with my faith and honor held high. And if I should lose, let me stand by the road and cheer as the winners go by.
All of us have a dream. Most people never go after their dream.
He was unusually imaginative and visionary.
Mr. Staley is a pioneer in the soybean industry. Yes, Decatur has lost a good friend.
His career was distinguished by the integrity and broad vision that was characteristic of him.
A book by Irving Shumway in 1936 included Staley among industry barons like Firestone, Rockefeller, Hershey, and Ford. In August of 1940, Forbes magazine and Reader's Digest recognized A.E. Staley as a man who had done more for the American farmer than any other man alive.
A.E. Staley is synonymous with the city of Decatur. Without A.E. Staley, I don't think a lot of people would know exactly what Decatur is all about.
He found a way to make the community much better.
Our organization and many organizations in Decatur are still benefiting from that year after year by what he started and how he really got everybody in his organization involved.
It was amazing to see his vision come through to life, to see the ideas he had, and then little by little, and here they're working, and to this day they're still working.
He really helped that industry explode. You can pick up just about anything on a shelf in a grocery store, and part of it probably came from Decatur.
4 generations later in Illinois, there are still corn and beans growing on family soil because one boy knew his destiny. He dared to dream and never let go.
you.